Welcome into Browns Film Breakdown post-game coverage of Browns 27-14 defeat to the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Browns fall to 3-10. The Steelers improve to 10-3. And I think it's kind of fitting that their records are exact opposites of each other because it does feel like the Steelers are in many ways having the season that we thought the Browns would be having, hoped the Browns would be having, with a quarterback that has kind of recaptured his old form after a big trade. So it is a disappointing result, not an unexpected result. The Steelers were big favorites and they played like it and kind of controlled the game for the most part, even though the Browns were in it for a while. But I would say mistakes compounded to the point that the Browns were no longer able to compete. And once they were down 2 scores, it really felt like the game was over because it didn't feel like the Browns had the capacity offensively to score at will or even to keep up with the Steelers at that point. And then they fought back and scored a late touchdown, relatively meaningless, to make the score a little bit nicer. But overall, a pretty one-sided game. I'm joined by Jake Burns. Jake, this is the type of game that you hoped that we wouldn't see coming down the stretch from the Browns. It wasn't. The score is definitely not as ugly as it felt at times in terms of the disparity of effort and the disparity of professionalism, I guess I would say. The Browns played a sloppy game, deserved to lose, and it's just not a very heartening place to be with this team, especially considering this is a Steelers team that they just beat a week and a half ago.
Yeah, I thought you and I sort of nailed the pregame show where we talked about they couldn't win with the same formula that they had the first time, which was, giving up the football too many times, not coming up with enough defensive stops, and all of that played out sort of in real time. I mean, the Browns have been a team this year that has by far, more often than not, and this is a pretty safe way to summarize their season, have not finished drives. Some things have worked on some drives, but they've not finished anywhere near enough of them. And then when you consider what we'll get to with Dustin Hopkins at 16 of 25 converting field goals, which it's already hard enough in the NFL when you put together a drive to give up a field goal. And when you're missing upward of 10 of those in a season, it makes it even harder than it is at the current point. And, on top of that, they don't convert enough third downs. And then they have given up too many, I just would say, pivotal moment defensive drives where they just don't seem to rise to the occasion enough. And that has plagued their defense, which has not been a bad defense, it's been an average defense. But again, I harken back to what we spoke about at the beginning of the year. Like if they were going to be a team, and they could probably be hovering around 500 right now if the defense was elite again, but they're not. And that played itself out in real time. I thought the defense played a decent first half, certainly good enough to keep them in the game. And offensively, they had done enough to make it a tie game, close to it coming out of half, should have been 13-13. And then you run into the second half where it's like, oh, Pittsburgh capitalizes, gets a couple drives to get into the end zone, and that's it. That's all she wrote. The Browns can't get to that point total, that 27 number in this game. So, yeah, that's in a lot of ways, Andrew, a microcosm of the season was what played out in Pittsburgh today.
I think that's right, and I think that it really kind of threw us back a bit in terms of the Jameis Winston conversation, right? Because this is the type of effort that we saw against the Chargers before the bye week that really kind of made you doubt whether or not he was going to be able to be a starter for them. And then, I would say an efficient performance against the Steelers in Cleveland, and then obviously what we saw on Monday night in Denver, even in a losing effort, just the productivity of that made you think, okay, what does this look like now for next year? And it's a good reminder that there is some unevenness that's inherent to his game beyond just the turnovers, right? The inaccuracy that we saw today. And I think just overall not looking as comfortable in running the offense, knowing where to go, struggling with pressure a lot. It reminded you that he's not a starter in the league for a reason. And the Browns might be able to get a season out of him next year if they want to, but it would include games like this, real clunkers, where you just kind of feel like it was obvious from the play calling. I thought, Jake, that there were multiple times during the game where they felt like they couldn't ask Jameis to throw the ball. And that's not a position you want to be in with an NFL offense. So overall, I would say a disappointing performance from him. But I thought I'm interested in your opinion on this. Just a disappointing performance from the offense in general. There was not a performance from the offense that I would kind of point out as impressive. I think Jerry Jeudy had a good game. We're watching his touchdown catch here now. I think he played well, but nobody there that I kind of left the game saying, "Wow, that's really what they needed to win."
No, I don't. I certainly don't think so either. In a matter of a game like this, they needed somebody to rise up and have a pretty ridiculous game. And I thought it started out strong. There was some indication, like, oh, okay, these guys could maybe put something together, could maybe find a way to, create out of chaos or something like that. And we were seeing that, like I said, with some of the some of the stuff early, and then you had really one play
in zone
kind of late there to Njoku that led to a score. But largely, Andrew, when we're talking about performances from this game, those are the only two that stood out as far as plays that were made sort of down the field. So, when you analyze it from the perspective of like these guys can't seem to put it together, enough drives, enough plays. Jameis, what do you have? 212 and a couple touchdowns, a couple interceptions. Definitely not the performance that he needed to have. And those were a lot of padded stats late into the game. I think they were only sitting at like 120 yards at various points in the middle of the third quarter before the game's outcome was late third quarter, 27-7, and it was largely decided. So, yeah, I mean, I thought Jerry Jeudy, given opportunity, played pretty well. He had 6 targets, 5 catches, 65 yards, 64 yards, something like that. So I thought he was fine. I don't know that he got enough targets. And then the thing that stood out to me was auxiliary help wise. I think Elijah Moore had 3 for 35 or something along those lines, and a big target game for David. 13 targets that he only hauls in 7 of those. And there's the final kind of jump ball that we showed there. That's a 15-yard touchdown. If you take that away, I mean, it's a 12 target, 6 catch, 27-yard game. That's like a lot of those late down targets were going to him and not rendering much separation. And he obviously wasn't winning the football. So it was pretty rough from that perspective. And I wouldn't call that a great game from David, even though the last touchdown kind of puts it into that world. But I think the formula, Andrew, and what I would say that I have noticed is teams that give Jameis the most issue are those who are able to get pressure with their front organically. And then from that pressure with their front, they're able to drop a lot of guys into coverage. And when they're able to drop, guys into coverage, I think that turns into a situation where Jameis is going to struggle. We're watching here the interception. Like, he just can't make those critical decisions at the right moment. Like, that should be a dirted football, but he can't seem to get through and understand, like, hey, at this moment right here, there's pressure. There's somebody sitting right behind Nick. There's a redirection from Keanu Benton there, number 95. Like, I should put this football into the ground and live to play second down. He can't seem to do that. And then what I was kind of getting at is that's a pressure look. So that is kind of unique in the fact that it's a pressure look in that moment, Andrew. But like the thing that he struggles with is teams who drop 6 or 7, drop 7 into coverage and can bring 4 and create a bunch of chaos for him where he can't, have a clear, decisive passing lane to throw to. So if the scheme doesn't give him an answer, and teams like the Chargers and the Steelers, who created enough pressure to not have him have open windows behind it, that's where he has struggled in 2 games the most this season. If you look at Baltimore, there were a lot of man coverage and a lot of pressure packages, so he was able to identify and without much confusion post-snap get a football delivered. He just looked confused today. He didn't feel comfortable processing out what was going on in coverage paired with what he was doing scrambling-wise. A lot of dropped eyes in that scenario too, and when you add in dropped eyes and you add in some of the other stuff, like he's creating his own pressure. He really didn't throw the football very accurately today. And then you have some rough decision making. And I would consider this probably on par or worse than that Chargers game performance. So this is the worst version of him. And then, you get the good version, but then you still have a couple plays that can also undo it. If that Broncos game is the biggest indication. So yeah, just a tough way to live at that position is how it's kind of got to be.
I mean, that's a great point about even the high tide, which was Monday night, didn't result in a win, right? Yeah. It was incredibly impressive from a statistical measure, and he played a really good game. I'm not trying to take anything away from him, but the mistakes were of such a critical nature that it undid a lot of the good work that he did throughout the game, and so you end up back kind of where you started. And it I know that this season is not just about who the quarterback for next year is going to be, that kind of maybe competes with Deshaun Watson or is that bridge quarterback for them, but it is obviously a big part of it, right? And I think we've talked about before, Jameis Winston has this opportunity before him to do the sorts of things that would make it so that the Browns felt like they didn't have a choice. If he could have recreated the success that Joe Flacco had down the stretch, even though their record is worse and they're not going to the playoffs. Last year, they didn't feel that they could sign Flacco because they didn't want to put that pressure on Watson. That decision would have been reversed this year, I think, and Winston would be back. This sort of unevenness, it makes it hard to say, okay, we definitely need to bring this guy back. And I think that then you start to have these questions about who that person is. But beyond the quarterback play, I also wanted to talk, offensively, the run game conversation is here again, because it was another week where if they're under center, they're not running the ball, and if they're in shotgun, things are better, but still not overly consistent. It's something you've been doing a great job talking about on our website and also on the podcast. So I was hoping you could kind of break down this one in terms of seeing some of those trends continue and what it looked like to you today.
Yeah, I mean, if you account for the Jerome Ford negative 5-yard run there on fourth down, I mean, I think the Browns were 4 carries under center. Jameis was one of them on a quarterback sneak for 2. They went for like negative 4 yards under center on 4 or 5 carries. They can't do it. The first play of the game offensively was an indication of like, these guys cannot solve how to block a box right now. They can't do it. They're not moving the point of attack. So last week, I think that they were 10 carries, 17 yards under center. This week, it's worse again. Even though, last week was better shotgun, and it was better than a gun today. I mean, Nick had 9 for 53, largely aided. He had a 19-yard run in there too, but it was good. I mean, they were effective, like 5.9 a carry for him. Jerome Ford was 9 for 33. Not great, but still something to lean into. And then Jameis had 2 designed where he kept it, and on a read scheme, he could pull the football out and pull it and run, and he had a couple of those. Another one was a scramble, I think, so it's kind of hesitant to give him credit for that. But 21 for 112 from the gun is fine. That's good enough. But it speaks to a team just loses any ability with an immobile quarterback to get under center and have deceptive play action under center. It eliminates a large part of what their playbook wants to be. If you cannot get under center and do anything from under center that matters, and then you, like you said, you lose any run pass conflict because hey, we're not really worried about being aggressively downhill against the run under center because our front can handle it, and we'll get to it when we get to it. We'll punch out quickly. So bad offensive line game under center. And really what they've turned into, Andrew, is a team that prefers a finesse blocking approach. They want to run laterally from the gun, and from that either RPO design or a lateral pen pull or a lateral wide zone, they want to lean into that. And I don't know if the nature of RPO work that they did all preseason leads to where you're just sort of getting more comfortable with position blocking than anything else. We'll be interested to see if they can be an effective gun run team. It doesn't kill you so much, but I just do think that there is a world they want to live in where they can get under center and create downfield shot throws off of their play action under center. And if they can't do that, then it leans into a recreation of what you want to be week to week, which I think is such a challenge for both of those guys. Even Ken doesn't want to necessarily, as an OC, Dorsey live that way. So yeah, it's a problem because again, I don't think that they have a dynamic, consistent shotgun drop back passer in their organization right now that you can lean into to handle that. Cincinnati's run into those types of games with Joe Burrow where he's had to have a ridiculous amount of dropbacks. There have been these quarterbacks that have handled that as their teams have struggled in the run game, but they're just more talented. They're more consistent football players. And Jameis he's just not that. And then you put yourself in this situation where the only things you can do play action wise involve shotgun, and it just doesn't create the type of commitment in the back half of the defense to the run to make it a more meaningful, a part of your offense. And that's a problem. And it loses against good defenses, and Broncos are certainly good, but they're definitely not as programmed up or disciplined as I would say Pittsburgh has been over the years. And their guys have bought into that style and obviously a much more consistently threatening front than, even though Denver has a lot of sacks, I think some of that stuff can be a bit of a mirage for pressure. where you land a bunch of sacks because there's not a ton of respect. And Pittsburgh's as fear to pass rushes you'll find across the NFL, and they got Highsmith back for this game. So I just am getting at, like, losing that part of your playbook is massive, and it cannot be hand waved away by being like, well, they're better out of the gun, they run it well. What a trickle effect does that have on your team and your approach and your mentality? And that's, as we've seen, it's a hindrance to their overall general efficiency.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this in the context of where Andy Dickerson came from, the offensive line coach, and what his background is. And having just watched the Rams put 44 points on the Bills and what that offense is doing and the way that they've kind of redesigned their offensive line over the past few years to be a lot more downhill under center run heavy than they were previously under McVay. And just wondering about, I guess I just wonder about the fit of all of the offensive staff members, right? Like, I think the best case scenario when we looked at this in the offseason was that you would get the parts of the Kevin Stefanski run game and play action game that work so well, and then you would marry those with some pass concepts and maybe some RPO stuff from Ken Dorsey, and it's like a plus plus a plus. And instead, it feels like to some extent the opposite of that, Jake, where we see a lot more of the run stuff that was more of a liability for both the Bills and the Rams at times in previous years, in terms of not being able to get under center and run it when they need to run it. And then passing game wise, it has been, when the Kevin Stefanski stuff works, it works, but when it doesn't, they don't really have answers against these sorts of defenses, like you said. So maybe that's an oversimplification, but I think Jake really hated that theory. He just bailed totally. That's fair. That's fair. I get it. My point is that I think that the overall effect, it feels like they're jack of all trades, master of none, and there's not a thing. Last week against Denver, I feel like that was a lot about some of the personnel issues on Denver's side and the scheme matching up really well. But in a game like this, in a divisional game where the Steelers know so well what the Browns want to do, I would struggle to tell you, Jake, what it was that they could do reliably in this game on offense. And it just feels like in these situations, or that game against the Chargers, they don't have an answer.
No, and I would argue that they didn't have an answer last week. I mean, they're throwing it 65 times, dropping back 65 times. So, like,
that's a good point.
Yeah, they put up some points, and that was fun, and there were some downfield throws, and you can't deny that. But you cannot. It's really hard. I think we talked about this earlier in the week on shows. Like as a quarterback, having the burden of dropping back 65 times, it's just a lot. And when your margin of error is that exposed, like your just sheer opportunity is that wide, mistakes are going to be made. It's really hard to do that. The hardest thing to do is drop back and throw the football. And when you're asked to do it 65 times, that just yields more issue. And then you play a team that defends the pass and doesn't have an issue with their quarters versus these looks, and we can't scheme them up the way they did last week. Like, yeah, Andrew, it's an awful formula. And these last 4 games are not going to be pretty, especially if there's no ability to lean into the run game to obviously create efficiency, but then also give you some things in the pass game off that run game. That's something, again, worth noting, is like, yes, the Browns had some run from gun success, but one of the best aspects of gun run, or any run, I shouldn't even say gun run, is that run threat opens up so many things in your passing game, stretches the field's 53, gives you more vertical spacing to either hit the second or third level or over the top. And yeah, the gun run stuff is more efficient, and it was fine, 80 yards or so on 18 carries, but it's not helping your pass game at all. And that's the thing to understand, is like, they're not, to your point, there is not a cohesive offense that builds on itself within every snap. There is not a threat every snap. It is more of just a, pick a play thing. Like, it's not like,
right, this works, this doesn't. Yeah,
like there's a football beauty in the art of play calling called sequencing, where this play builds on this play that builds on that play that threatens that play. And I feel like the Browns have had one of the worst sequencing years I can recall, where it just feels like they're trying to fight to get a first down, let alone thinking 5 plays down the road. They're just fighting to get in position to have a chance to not have a 3rd and long,
right,
let alone sequencing and thinking and being out in front of what's coming down the road. And that is again, it speaks to the bigger issue. Now, that, Andrew, comes from the question of, was Kevin forced to replace his people this past offseason?
Right.
And is 1 year of all these new people enough
Right.
to really make a full-on judgment of either Kevin's ability or all of these guys to put something together that works? And I don't have the right answer for that right now.
Right. I think that's where my mind goes, because that's it. You kind of just develop that feeling watching it, that it feels like too many cooks in the kitchen, not a clear identity, those sorts of cliches. And yeah, exactly. The fourth inches call is a perfect example.
And I'll elaborate on that if you don't mind, real
No,
quick.
please go ahead. Yeah.
That play is probably like, you step up to the line. What I would like to do in that scenario is say, if you get up to the line and you feel good about a sneak, the A gaps aren't stuffed, there's not a walked up line, just run it. If you want to check, here's what we do. The problem with that play, and I don't know, I can't guarantee you that if this block happens, it goes for a first down. But they are calling a crack block from Mike Woods on a Landon Roberts, which is, it's not a great block scenario for a guy like Mike Woods. Landon Roberts is one of the most physical linebackers in the NFL in terms of just hitting you in the mouth. He put Ethan Posick into a temporary paralysis on a lateral run play early in the game.
He
where
plays violently.
He plays. That's a great way to put it. He actually had when he was with the Dolphins a few years ago, I don't know if you recall this, had one of the better hits on Nick Chubb, meeting him in the hole and really planting him. Yeah. So he plays physical, and asking Mike Woods to crack block that player. First, Mike's effort was awful, but second of all, that's a tough ask. Like, that's a really tough ask when you're playing in a 4th and 1 where a linebacker has no fear of any pass game conflict. And there's a shared responsibility of failure on those sorts of things. And it also, it's funny, Andrew, it stems from 3 things. Obviously, the coach making a risky call there that I don't think necessarily felt like it needed to be forced into that moment. Second of all, is asking your coach, your player doesn't get it done. Your coach asking that player to get that job done is tough. And then the third element of that, which is at the top, is if you want to run an offense that asks wide receivers to be grown men blockers, you got to draft that type of player and acquire that type of player and put that player in that position. Whoever your best blocking wide receiver is has to be there to do that job. And I guess if it's Mike Woods, no offense to Mike, but that speaks to how it's a full circle pie chart of blame that goes
Jake,
on.
I'll tell you who it's not. It's not Kadarius Toney.
It sure isn't, Andrew. We've pinned that down. Pinned it down.
Yeah, I mean, and I just like want to build off of your point here, because Jamari Thrash, I think, is out with a shoulder injury today. It wasn't 100% clear. He was questionable going into the game. He was inactive. Yeah, he's not going to be your blocking type there either. They don't really have that depth, but they have spent the time to put Kadarius Toney on the practice squad, keep him around all season, and then bring him up for the end of the season. And he has been as predictably frustrating and disappointing and stupid mistake making as you could have called that from September or October when the transaction was made. And what I'll say about it is that it's not the most egregious part of being 3-10, but I do think that it really encapsulates a bad habit that Andrew Berry just cannot seem to break, which is, this is a talented athlete who was drafted high. We've got to spend a roster spot. We've got to spend some time seeing if we can get any sort of surplus value out of this player. He's addicted to that, especially guys that are kind of idiots, right? That's the classic special is first highly drafted and kind of a head case. If you can get both of those, Andrew Berry's like on the phone right away. And again, you can take those chances from time to time, but it almost becomes a parody of itself when it happens every time. And then he makes a penalty mistake, and then the fumble that ends the game. I mean, even if the game was over, it effectively ended the game, and doesn't provide anything offensively. So what is that? He had one good punt return. What is that player doing? And what other young player that has a scope for development is being replaced by Kadarius Toney, the sort of player that is, again, transparently a waste of their time?
Yeah, it's a really hard one to understand. We've seen the best of Kadarius Toney as a wide receiver. We've seen the best of him work with Patrick Mahomes. And like, what about a guy who is clearly a mental problem? He's a let me make sure I'm very buttoned up on this. He has mental instability with making winning decisions. Say it that way. And he has been involved in situations the Giants were not, and he proved to you how badly the Giants wanted him out of there. KC had him, who could use him like few could, got something out of him before he made enough decisions that said we don't want him around anymore. We've got a bunch of failed Sky Moore, these guys, and we have no wide receiver situation that's any good here at that time. And they're like, we're good here. So what makes you think a guy like that's going to come into Cleveland, a place struggling to find enough people doing the right thing the right way to win ball games, especially this season? And when they brought him in, the writing was on the wall at that point. What's the chances he turns into something meaningful for you? Maybe what? Like a shade under 1%, and like the likelihood that the thing like today happened, or he is an annoying voice in your locker room of negativity that we don't even know about, but just like listen to him talk publicly about how his teams have played or how he plays or to fans. Like, what good can come from that? And then today, like, you brought him up a couple times and he was an absolute non-factor. And then you bring him up today and you have, hey man, you go return punts. And yeah, he had one, but he caught one inside the 5-yard line. It's just a habitual thing for the Browns return team. It's neither here nor there. Maybe a part of a more broad discussion about special teams, but like, I cannot fathom what would make you think that was a good idea about like, oh man, the upside of Kadarius Toney figuring out how to be something meaningful for a team like this. Like that, it's like, hey man, can you read the room? You need people that are just going to keep their head down and work hard. Like Kadarius Toney is not so talented that you should swing. Like I can understand some of it when Kareem Hunt was put into Cleveland because of that, like, because he was good. He was really good. And like, I just, like, I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know, Andrew.
let me just like help contextualize this, right, Jake? Because the Browns have Cedric Tillman, who's got this concussion, which is concerning in and of its own right that it has not resolved yet. He's out for this game. You've added Mike Woods to the active roster. You've got Jerry Jeudy, you've got Elijah Moore, you've got Mike Woods. Those are your starting 3 wide receivers, right? Those are the top 3 on the depth chart. The other 2 wide receivers active for this game are Kadarius Toney and James Prochet. And those guys don't really play wide receiver. They're not fully formed wide receivers. So the Browns went into this game, Jake, with 3 honest to God wide receivers. And that's the sort of stuff when you look at why the Browns are where they are. Again, that's not what won them or lost them this game. But it shows a lack of, in my mind, an understanding of what it takes to win football games, where there are not players on the bottom of the roster in some of these positions that you can count on to do a small job well. And we see, you mentioned that they keep catching punts inside the 10. Those sorts of things come up again and again, where the guys at the back end of the roster, or you want to talk about the cornerbacks that they keep on the roster that play special teams but can't play corner. And when that comes up, it always bites them in the butt. This is a roster construction issue that keeps coming up for the Browns, where they are playing shorthanded because the general manager is trying to go, like Antiques Roadshow or whatever, and find gold in the trash. And it keeps not working. And it's really frustrating.
Yeah. And to sort of, I guess, put a bow on that is like, you're watching the other side, and Pittsburgh deserves credit for a lot of things, but a guy like Scotty Miller making that catch at the very end, to have the faith to throw a moon ball, which I'm so flabbergasted how Pittsburgh has done that across like 8 quarterbacks now. Just moonball it up. And I guess Russ has always done that, so I should be careful. He's always done that. But it is weird how there's been like a feature of Ben, Duck Hodges, and Mason and Pickett. It's so weird.
Mike Tomlin has to know how hard that is to defend. And so he tells the offensive coordinator, we're going to throw back shoulder fades down the field.
Yeah, we're going to quota you at 7 of these. I don't feel like the Browns run any lobbed back shoulder fades. They just don't do it.
Just the one that Mike Woods had the OPI on.
Yeah, but even like that, I'm talking like that moonball stuff where Pittsburgh has always done this, where it's just lobbed. It's like lob it and go get it. But anyway, you look at that and it's like and they talk about it and people scoff at this culture thing. I think it's very real. I think if you're ignoring culture, I think that's proceed with caution, because like Pittsburgh has had a means by which, for the most part, the percentage of hit here is high, where they get more out of those guys we're talking about. I am just saying Kadarius Toney wouldn't be the same if Pittsburgh brought him in versus when Cleveland does, because these guys, they have a way of making them believe that they're a part of winning and they're going to do whatever it takes to win. And listen, there are examples of Pittsburgh guys that fail. This is not foolproof, but I'm just saying their hit rate on these guys, the ability to bring up these players and instill a belief in them and play in this fashion, is a credit to Tomlin and a credit to that organization, and just something the Browns are striving to figure out how to do. They can't figure out how to do it. So yeah, you're talking about, is Kadarius Toney more talented than Scotty Miller? By a mile. But one guy is like able to figure out how to make those plays in those moments, where the other guy is throwing the football as a punt returner and it's somebody who said something to him, or muffing a punt. Like, that's just the nature of it, Andrew. That's the belief that they have instilled there, and it's bearing fruit.
Yeah, that is the bottom of the line here, is that when you have losses like this on top of the other losses that they have, you start to look at these more nitpicky things and dig into the weeds. I know that it's very small bore, but I do think it's emblematic of a problem across the roster, with the depth of the roster not contributing as much as you'd like it to at times. That's not true everywhere, though. We should talk about the defense a little bit, Jake. I thought we saw some good performances from some of those depth type players at times, and I thought that there was some reason to think that the defense was going to keep them in this. You kind of said off the top, it's not a dominant defense. It's not a top 5, top 10 unit. It's an average defense, but with a different sort of offensive performance, they could be in these games and make some of these plays. They still have Myles Garrett. They still have Denzel Ward. They have difference makers, but they really struggle, Jake, when they're put behind the 8 ball like they were today, playing from behind, not able to really get much of a pass rush, trying to tackle Jalen Warren, which was a nightmare for them all day. And they have those moments in the second half where the Browns, they have the fourth down conversion that doesn't go. They have the turnover, and they've got these relatively short fields. They've got these quick change situations, and the defense has to kind of bow up in those moments. And they all season have not really lived up to those moments.
No, that's about as well said as it can be for like when you put a how do we best describe what has gone on with this team? It's like you're right that there are guys who have stepped up and there are some guys who have played well, but it's a run of these moments where the 2 kicks today, you could feel it. You could feel the life getting sucked out of the whole thing, because the offense is grinding against that defense and that crowd to go put some points on the board. And hey, man, we could be tied, right? Think about it from this perspective. And listen, do I want the defense to overcome? Yes, but look at the way some of these defenses who play really well and win these close games, they don't deal with as many kicks in the stomach, right? As like all of this. So, to go down the field, have a short 36-yarder right before half. Let's take this thing in 10-10 or 13-10 or whatever it was at that point. This will feel all right. I think it might have been 10-10. But anyway.
It was 13-7 when he missed that first kick. Yeah.
Right on. Yeah. So again, you get it to 13-10. You feel pretty good. You come out of half, even after that miss, and you have a 59-yard kickoff return. And yeah, do you want the offense to score? Sure. But that Pittsburgh defense is good. And to beat those guys, you're going to have to win that sort of slug it out, low scoring 17-14 game maybe. And I feel like the defense has had a season long, and I was against this idea earlier in the year. I've tried to back off of this, like giving them excuses, but it does get so frustrating to have, like, in these games, everything rolls downhill. And like at that point, you start to just become less mentally tough. And it's like, all right, another missed 42-yard, like another missed easy kick. We're doing this again.
Right.
Then they get it to 3rd down and 8. and they get about to get another stop, and then they bring a pressure, and Russell Wilson sneaks out the middle of the line and throws a ball to Pat Freiermuth, and then it's rolling downhill, where it feels like this year they can't put the shovel down and climb out. They just keep digging.
Right.
And
Yep.
I do think it is at the point for this defense, they've had clunkers, man. Like that New Orleans game was a clunker. I certainly don't think last week was one of their best efforts, but they've been good enough to win, Andrew, a lot of weeks this year. And I just feel like they're constantly the weight of it all constantly on you like that is it's a lot. It's a lot to handle. So I don't blame them for not being as good consistently as we'd hope, because they've just been, by the special teams or by their own offense and the kicker, put into these just ridiculous holes of misfortune, and they're trying to constantly fight for life out there, man.
I think that's fair. And yeah, I it's not even so much about placing that blame as it just is kind of noticing as it happens. Like you said, that first field goal miss, and then they get the ball back to start the second half, have the chance, and then they miss again, and then the fourth down. By the end of that, the defense has really checked out. And watching that happen in real time, and kind of, to be honest with you, Jake, expecting it based on what we've seen from the defense through the year so far, is disheartening, just from the standpoint that this has been a year where those sorts of things, when they can go wrong, they have gone wrong, like you said, and they aren't able to bounce back. And you have the examples, the exceptions to that rule. You have the game against the Ravens, the game against the Steelers, but it's not enough. It's 3-10, so there's a lot more losses than there are wins. So I think that I want to try and hold off on any big picture conversations on these wrap ups, because we'll end up saying the same thing week after week, right? We don't know. There's a lot of questions. It feels like all the indications have been that these guys are coming back, but 3-10 is 3-10. They've got a tough schedule remaining, so we'll just keep kind of seeing how things fall next week at home against the Kansas City Chiefs. So the assignment does not get any easier. I think we'll leave things there and come back with you tomorrow for more on this game and what round 2 of Steelers Browns was like. Of course, the full offensive and defensive film rooms will be up this week on brownsfilmbreakdown.com, as well as plenty of other insights about the Browns' latest defeat and the path forward day by day. So keep it tuned to brownsfilmbreakdown.com. And then, of course, the podcast will have something on a daily basis as well about your favorite team. So thank you for joining us tonight. For Jake, I'm Andrew. Until next time, everybody, be well. Go Browns.
Go Browns.